Crimea is absolutely the strategic prize in terms of the future. If that were to go or be sealed by the Ukrainians, then the future of Putin would be seriously threatened. That does also not mean that someone who were to replace Putin would be someone who the West could deal with. And again, there are various scenarios there about if Putin were to go, could we have a reset with the West? Part of the answer to that is it depends what the system is. But the system is the system in Russia. That is that it's often defined as a security and mafia state, and the West really has a Russia problem, not just a Putin problem. And if you look at the sort of bench of people who might replace Putin, they're also of what we would call the Siloviki. They're from the sort of security establishment, the men of force. Indeed, 79% of Putin's government in 2019 were from the Silovaki, and by that we really mean either FSB, GRU, and the security agencies and the military. They are the powerhouse, the kingmakers in Russia. So unless you were to completely change the system in Russia and go to a new federated federal system, and a parliamentary system, not a presidential model, without that, you'll just have someone who's a potential clone of Putin, and the Russians might then come again in 5 years, 10 years, whatever, depends on when their capacity and capability were to be of the order when they could think that they could do that again, and go again to secure their grand strategic objectives. That is still to do with their spheres of influence and where they see their orbit in Western Europe, and certainly in those former Soviet republics. You have to remember that Putin in 1990, when the dissolution of the Soviet Union was happening, when we were lauding Gorbachev in the West, Putin was calling him a fool because he'd given something up with nothing to show for it in return. And it's that which has always clouded the way that Putin looks about the post-Soviet Union era. If you've got significant numbers of Russians fleeing Crimea, then that is bound to permeate into society, because generally those people who are either going on holiday or were settled in Crimea are those who have either influence or would have the social networks and contacts to make that permeate through a wider part of Russian society. One of the things we've always said about Putin is that he's been there twice as long as Hitler was in power, and in that time he's been able to isolate sort of media and social networks for regime indoctrination. He wouldn't be able to indoctrinate people for a physical reality that lots of people have fled from Crimea.